Buonasera, good evening. I guess we can start. Welcome everyone to this conversation on journalism awards and in particular on their importance in protecting and supporting journalism. This event is organized by the European Press Prize, whom some of you might know. Since 2012, the EPP wants to salute and encourage journalism of the highest quality wherever it can be found in Europe. Journalists from the Council of Europe's 47 member states, 46 maybe now, plus Belarus can participate. The award is one of the most generous around. It's second only to the Pulitzer, and it's 10,000 euros. It is supported by several European foundations like the Garden Foundation and the Stichting voor Democratie and the Media. So I warmly invite you to participate if you qualify and if you didn't already. The shortlisted participants of the 2022 edition will be announced just after this session at the Hotel Brufani, but I invite you to follow it on social media. So now let me introduce our panelists. Starting from my left, so your right, Alexandra Foederl-Schmid was the Israel correspondent for the Süddeutsche Zeitung and is now the deputy editor-in-chief of this historic newspaper based in Munich. She was the former co-publisher and the editor-in-chief of the Austrian daily Der Standard, and she was also the first female editor-in-chief of this daily. Alexandra reported extensively on European issues, including the wars in former Yugoslavia and the EU enlargement. And above all, Alexandra is a member of the jury of the European Press Prize. On my left is Megha Rajagopalan. You're a correspondent for BuzzFeed News in London, and you have more than a decade of experience in reporting across Asia and the Middle East, and above all, Megha has been awarded the 2021 Pulitzer Prize for innovative investigation for her report on the secret mass internment infrastructures that were secretly built by China for detaining Uyghurs in Xinjiang, in the far west region of China. And between them there is Alan Rusbridger, who is the chair of the European Press Prize jury. Alan is also the principal at the Lady Margaret Hall in Oxford and the chair at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. But most people know Alan because he was the editor-in-chief of The Guardian between 1995 and 2005. And as such, Alan, you endured months of threats and pressures from politicians when you published the Edward Snowden files, which eventually got you rewarded with the first European Press Prize Special Award in 2014. As for me, I'm Gianpaolo Accardo. I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of VoxEurope.eu, a website on European cross-border stories and investigations. I'm also the Secretary General of the Louis Weiss Prize for European Journalism, which has been awarded since 15 years ago by the French section of the Association of European Journalists. So this session will last for about 1 hour, and hopefully there will be some spare time for questions by the audience at the end. I would like to start with the first round of questions, and with you, Megha. So you got several awards for your work, and culminating with the Pulitzer, whom everybody knows. What did those journalism prize brought you in terms of protection, support, motivation, career boost?
Oh, thanks. Okay, it is on. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think our team was really grateful for the additional recognition. Obviously, we don't do work to win prizes. I don't think most serious journalists do that. I think prizes are usually an afterthought or something that the organization thinks about rather than the people doing the work, except in the case of freelancers and some other exceptions, I think. And I think for us, like the primary thing that at least that I'm really grateful for, is that it helped bring a much bigger audience to the work. When we first published, we did get quite a big audience because there was no paywall, and BuzzFeed's it's pretty good at promotion and distribution. But I think winning some of the more mainstream journalism prizes, particularly in the U.S., it brought more people to the work that wouldn't necessarily have been looking for news on BuzzFeedNews.com. And it sort of brought, one more additional layer of credibility to the work, I think, and I'm sort of particularly grateful for that. Obviously, it was there were three of us on the team, and out of the three of us, I'm on staff at BuzzFeed News, and the other two are freelance and we're working independently. So I think the money was also an important component of that, because I think particularly freelancers are often undercompensated, and in this case, I think any other kind of credit or compensation for their work was definitely warranted.
Thank you, Mega. Alexander and Alan, why do you think that, being part of several juries now during your career, why do you think that those prizes are important for journalism and for journalists? What do they bring to it? Want to go first, Alexander?
I would like to mention at least three issues. The first one is prestige. I think everybody likes to get an award which can boost your career. It's also something to be proud of, you, your family, maybe also your employer, it depends. And it's also a kind of honor for us and for our work. And the second thing I want to mention is and this is also important for the European Press Prize. We also want to bring awareness with this prize, because we in the jury, Ellen is also a member of the jury, we are talking about articles which are published in Eastern European countries, for instance, because we in the Western concentrated world are very much focused on Brussels issues, for instance. And the European Press Prize tries to bring attention to the other parts of Europe, especially in the eastern part. So we try to focus on articles which are dealing with corruption, and there are brave journalists dealing with these issues in these countries. And for them, it's also a kind of protection, maybe, because if they get an international award, well, that's something. And maybe, well, it's good for them in this sense as well. And Kan Dündar is in the audience, maybe. I'm sure you all know him. He was editor-in-chief of Cumhuriyet for many years in Turkey. Then he was jailed and sentenced to 27 years, if I remember correctly. And he's living now in Germany since 2016. And, well, he knows what it means to fight for press freedom personally, and how important it is to get a kind of protection, because with such an award there is also some attention and also personal attention, and I think this is also important for journalists who work in really under difficult circumstances. Well, in the last few years, we had articles from Belarus, for instance, and now, well, everything has changed in the last few weeks. But even in the Balkans, it's difficult for journalists to work. There is a lot of suppression, and with such an award, well, there is a special notion, and it's also a signal for press freedom.
Thank you, Alexander. And would you like to add something also with regards to your personal experience as the editor of The Guardian?
I think I agree with the things we just said, Alexander, about the three things that really count. Right. Hello. I'm going to echo the same three things, but maybe with a slight sort of personal twist. That in 2013, when we were working on the Edward Snowden story, it was by no means clear that we wouldn't end up in jail, some or all of us. We were up against the Espionage Act in the US and the Official Secrets Act in the UK. The police were certainly investigating me for 5 years, and I'm sure the American authorities were mounting their own investigations, and we've seen what's happened to Julian Assange. And it just so happened in that year, thank you, we got the European Press Prize. I got the European Press Prize. The Pulitzer Committee recognized the Washington Post and the Guardian. There was the George Polk Prize. And there was the Right Livelihood Award, which was a Swedish award. And I just think that made it harder. I think it made it harder to arrest us and prosecute us, because these were serious juries of journalists and people in civic society saying, actually, this story was important, it mattered. And I think in a tiny way, my experience is as nothing to the kind of experience of Belarusians or Ukrainians or Russians today or Turks. But even in a relatively protected society like the UK, having that award was definitely a form of protection. Then there is this celebratory quality that the journalists, perhaps who are famous, can be the loudest or the most sensational or get the most clicks because of the area that they're covering. But I think it's really lovely to see a theatre critic awarded, or somebody who covers health or the courts, or a columnist who's really expert in what they write about, or a dogged investigative reporter who maybe does unglamorous work about not very glamorous subjects. And to have that kind of journalism celebrated, I think is really important, which I think leads on to the point that Alexander mentioned, which is about the impact that has on a newspaper. It's nice for newspapers to win awards and to be encouraged to do things that may not be tremendously profitable or build circulation, but are nevertheless important in the role of a newspaper in society. And being able to, boast about the award that you've got and put it on your masthead or on your TV screen, and to say we got that award is important. And I agree, we shouldn't do. Well, if I do agree, I think sometimes it's nice to do stuff because you think you're going to get an award, and that would be a nice little bait at the end of it. And in America, sometimes you can see stories in certain newspapers that shall be nameless that you feel, that's definitely trying to get the Pulitzer, and is trying a bit too hard. But I don't think there's anything wrong in that.
Thank you. We've talked about protection of journalists is one of the main positive consequences of journalism prizes, and there's a growing number of journalism prizes around, but the number of journalists in prison is not going down, definitely. Belarus and Turkey are currently the countries where there are the most journalists detained in the world. So can we say that prizes provide actual protection to journalists who are living in countries where freedom of the press is under pressure? And if we look at, for example, it's not a journalistic prize, but the editor-in-chief of Novaya Gazeta in Russia got the Nobel Peace Prize, got the Nobel Peace Prize, and still his newspaper has been, he was forced to shut it down. To what extent does this protection work outside this, let's say, the journalistic the small journalistic world? How effective is it against politicians and totalitarian or authoritarian regimes, in your experience? And
I can start with that. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I guess I can talk sort of about prizes in a broader sense than this industry. If you talk about prizes that are given to people like dissidents, writers, artists, activists, as well as journalists, you know, like, it depends. There are a lot of variables. I think it depends who you are, what country, what context you're operating in. But I think what I've observed, at least in my reporting, is that there's kind of like, there's a thing that happens where you gain a lot more international fame and attention for your work and notoriety, and it gets to a point where there's sort of like a tipping point, and some people have really benefited from this stuff. Like, you know, like one example I can think of is the artist, the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, who is a very prominent dissident in China and then was able to leave China. And a lot of people that do the same kind of work as him and are as outspoken as him, you know, have been arrested and have been treated really badly. And I think a component of why he was able to avoid some of the worst excesses of that, although he has been to prison, is because he became extremely famous in the West. And a big part of that is prizes, I think. So there are examples like that, but at the same time, there are lots of counterexamples of you know, writers and activists who become very famous in the West, and it actually becomes worse for them. So I think the kind of responsible thing to do is sort of independently assess each situation and each particular context to see, you know, what's helpful and what can actually do harm.
You mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize, and two got this prize. It was not just Dmitry Muratov from the Novaya Gazeta, also Maria Ressa was awarded with at the same time with this prize from the Rappler in the Philippines, and we are both a member of the board of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, and Maria has a close connection to this institution, and she said it's really a kind of protection for her, because she's really doing in-depth journalism and investigative journalism, dangerous studies in the Philippines, and with this prize you got of course attention, and it's a kind of shield for her. That was her description, and this and that's why I think it's really something special and also necessary on the international level. And well, Russia is different, but nobody, I think, could imagine what would go on there. And on the other hand, when I talk with colleagues from the Balkans, brave ones, they say, we really try to apply to get an international award, because for us it makes the work also easier, and there is this kind of international attention, and that's why it is necessary to have prizes like the European Press Prize. And we would also like to invite more colleagues from these areas to apply.
Thank you. So you raised two interesting questions, Alexandra. One is the Balkans, because, as you said, they would like to apply, or they try to apply, but then one understands that they do not get the prizes in the end. Is it so, or because their work is too local, because they don't have the same impact, or because their news organizations are rather small, or very local, or they have their languages that most people don't read? And the other one is the question of putting the attention of the public on those countries that are less covered by, let's say, the Western media. And so do you have examples of prizes that actually have met those needs and have been not a game changer, but had an influence on those countries?
Yes, several colleagues from Albania and the Kosovo have talked about their work and the impact of their work. And as Ellen mentioned it, it's an important work for the society as a whole, because corruption is a problem in that region. And it's really a kind of very brave journalism to look closer what is going in the wrong direction. And they raise the awareness for an important topic. And normally people who are ruling the country are not so much interested in that kind of journalistic work, but it's an important one. And we, as Europeans, should be interested in fostering this journalistic approach.
I think it's a good opportunity. I mean, how you run a prize is obviously really important, and what you're trying to say with the prize. There was a period in the UK where I don't think there was a good answer to that. The award, I mean, the award ceremonies can become hugely over-commercialized, and you can get lots of sponsors in who want to be nice to journalists. And it all becomes about money and packing people in. And there was one year, I remember, a wonderful Guardian journalist called Ressa Abdullah, who had done brilliant reporting on Iraq, risked his life several times over being kidnapped, and he came into this. He was so pleased to be nominated for Reporter of the Year. And that year, the Reporter of the Year went to somebody who had, as it turned out, subsequently hacked the phone of the England football manager in order to reveal that he was having an affair. And I thought, looking at Wraith's face, I mean, how could you explain to him why this piece of journalism was more important than what he'd done? And that to me was a set of awards that had gone off the rails. But I'm a board member of the Columbia, the Campaign to Protect Journalists in New York. And that evening is, I think, an example of awards at their best. So they look all the way around the world for journalism that they should be celebrating. They're there to protect journalists, so it's about journalists who are in need of protection. They quite often fly them in. They explain properly what the journalism is, which again sometimes doesn't happen in award ceremonies where they're just trying to get the numbers through. And by the end of the evening, every year, it's a year that's incredibly moving at the courage of what people do in the name of journalism. Everyone leaves that evening feeling completely reconvinced about the need for what journalists do. So it's a great sort of affirmation of journalism. And by the way, it also raises shed loads of money, because all these rich New Yorkers come along and they're feeling proud, and they think, I must give in order to protect journalists like that. So if you get them right, they're wonderful. If you get them wrong, they're not great.
You're nodding. Would you like to add something, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think juries matter a lot. Yeah, I think like you said, I think it matters a lot, because ultimately the people that decide these awards it's like a bunch of people sitting in a room or a Zoom call, I think, more recently, and there can be bias that creeps into that, like one way or another, whether it's through something commercial or it's something much more benign, like biases that come from people's people's experiences, right? So if you have a group of people that are making choices about awards who all have the same sort of background, whether it's that they came from legacy publications or they have the same gender background or racial background, or came from the same part of the country, or what have you, it's going to color who actually wins the awards. So I just think it's one of those things where it's easy to say that it should be based just on the quality of the journalism, but it ends up being sort of in the eye of the beholder. And I think it's sort of incumbent upon institutions that give these big prizes that really can change people's lives and shape people's careers to like ensure that they're, that the prizes are being sort of decided in a way that is fair and is also kind of is selected by people that come from a sort of different variety of backgrounds. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I think a lot of this also depends on newsrooms, and there are some newsrooms that are able to really invest in certain kinds of reporting that happens to win a lot of awards, like reporting that takes a lot of time, is expensive, is often sort of calibrated, I think, sometimes to win awards. And there are some newsrooms that just cannot afford to do that, or they have other kinds of focuses, but do sort of equally valuable reporting. Things like really strong beat reporting that produces scoops, but doesn't produce like some really amazing like 3,000-word piece. And I think that that's, to me, like that's sort of a gap, I think, in this space. Like it's really hard to win awards for reporting that is just really, really good day in, day out, but doesn't produce any one piece that, or even a series of pieces that really, really stands out. And that's something that I would love to see acknowledged more, particularly from small newsrooms.
Yeah, thanks for raising that issue. When you have to evaluate some applications for a prize, of course you have big newsrooms like The Guardian or Der Spiegel who are applying with, as Mega said, they have a lot of means to do brilliant reporting, multimedia and so on. And then you also have small newsrooms, local, maybe in countries where there is not much money to do journalism, but that still have made some reporting with an impact locally. How do you strike the right balance between the two, and how do you cope with the tendency to reward those who are closest to your experience and the type of media that you consume in your language or that you are familiar with? Talking to the jurors here.
I mean, just personally, in judging this year's awards, I don't know if this was intentional, but when I printed them all off.
Me too.
And they came. Was it the same for you? So there was nothing that said what the organisation was, or even who the journalist was. Yeah. And I found that quite helpful, because in a way you were reading it completely blind. Mm. So. I mean, you know, obviously, if something was about Germany, you'd think, well, this is a German newspaper, probably, but actually, not always. And I think you make an important point, Mega, but that actually was one way of defeating any biases that you might have. I mean, the ability to tell a story compellingly is not really dependent on being part of a very large newsroom. And sometimes I was reading these entries, and I was unable to guess whether this was a very well-resourced newsroom or not, or whether it was just a rather brilliant storyteller who had done a lot of homework.
We have different categories, and some categories it depends on how you write. It's not necessary to have a big team, but on the other hand, we also have a category dealing with innovative projects, so it's a different approach. And on a personal level, I'm always glad that I learn more about different approaches and I get other perspectives, because in the last few years we had several applications, stories dealing with the refugee crisis. And being based in Central Europe, well, you know this story already, but it's a different journalistic angle if you follow refugees through the so-called Balkan routes. And this year we also have some stories articles dealing with Belarus, the Russian issue. Nothing with Corona, if I remember correctly. So, different perspective and a broader European perspective. I think that's important, especially for me, because there are not only applications from the EU or Great Britain, but also from the eastern part of the continent, and that's good. So we get a more complex world view.
And while evaluating applications at the European Press Prize, I understand that all the applications all the stories are translated into English,
Yes.
so that you're able to read them. But let's take an example, a story from Albania, a local story. It would be translated into English, but there won't be the context of it. And how do you manage to get the same kind of attention to a local story that has been translated, that has been written for the local public, that has been translated but with no context? How do you manage to give it the appropriate importance? It is because it's not the same as if it was written by a correspondent that would put it into context and use the same vocabulary or style that you would be used to.
Sometimes
You're
you're right, it's difficult, but colleagues preparing the papers, sometimes they give us also the context, so it's easier, and we try, to do our best to just to be fair and to try also to find out what the impact of the story is or might be under local circumstances, because everybody knows about Julian Assange and what you have done in these circumstances, or Süddeutsche Zeitung was awarded with the Pulitzer Prize for the Panama Papers. But these small journalistic projects, these brave journalists, sometimes on a local level. So we having everything on the table, and we discuss it, and it's also a very mixed jury, because the last few years a Russian colleague was part of the jury, and she was very empathic, and sometimes she had a completely different views on issues, and that's interesting.
I think this is specific to the European Press Prize, having to judge stories that come from different countries and that are originally for different audiences.
And I learn on a personal level so much, so that's for me really an incentive to be part of the jury.
While I understand that the Pulitzer is only for journalists who are working in English or in the US,
I think it's for publications that have some, are based in the US in some way. So for instance, The Guardian won a Pulitzer, even though it's a British publication, because they have The Guardian US.
Okay, just one last question about juries. How do you set up the perfect balance in a jury, in your opinion, in your experience?
I only joined last year, so I feel...
I'm not a person dealing with such questions, because I'm just a normal member, but there are people in the audience who can answer that question, because I think they are discussing these issues, and from time to time they have to replace persons, so maybe we can pass this question to somebody sitting in the first row.
Okay, so do you have memories of particularly tense or passionate discussions within the jury, like, I don't know, maybe like in 12 Angry Men, where one juror can overthrow the other, all the others on a specific
Well, I chaired it last year, and we didn't come to blows.
No.
No, it was quite peaceful.
Yeah,
But
but
again,
last year we haven't met in person,
that's true,
and
and
that
we hadn't
makes
drunken
really a
anything, yeah,
difference.
Yeah.
So this year, Alan.
Watch this space.
Okay. One solution is also to create a new prize or a specific prize when
That sometimes helps.
you have
Yeah.
troubles departing. Okay. And from the perspective of the journalists, the ones who got the prizes, what is driving journalists to try to get a prize? I mean, in some cases, do journalists or reporters really think this is a story that will get me a prize and are really focused on that more maybe than on other ethical issues? Does it happen? And
I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for people to set out to get these prizes, because I think most of the prizes are actually for good journalism, and that is like a good end, right? It's a better end than doing a piece because you can sell ads against it, or not that anyone does that, but I mean, maybe some newsrooms would hope that reporters would think more like that. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I would, if anyone asked me for advice on whether they should do that, I would tell them that it's a losing game, because you can't predict who is going to be on these juries or how they're going to perceive the work. And honestly, I think the best reason to do ambitious journalism is to have an impact and to reach readers. I think that should be the goal. And if a prize comes as a result of that or after that, I think that's obviously icing on the cake, and it can be very meaningful to people. But I don't really think that it should necessarily be the goal, because you're sort of hoping for something that you really can't control, I think. I think for newsrooms, the calculus can be a little bit different, at least from what I've observed. I'm not in newsroom management, but I think certainly it's a prestige thing. It can bring credibility, I think, particularly to newsrooms that are less well established or smaller. I've seen that a lot with the Pulitzers for local news reporters. I think it can have in the United States, local news is really facing a lot of problems in the U.S. In terms of budgets and for reporters, and I think prizes can have a really positive impact there to encourage more ambitious work. But yeah, I guess that's probably where I would stand.
Yeah, I think I guess I've answered already at that. I think encouraging both journalists and newspaper managements to do things that are valuable, that might not be lucrative. They might even be thinking of cutting because it's going to be celebrated, and that is something that I just think that is important. And if that means that people set out to win prizes, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Well, I don't know what I should add. I think everything is said to this point.
I was asking you this question. It came to my mind when recently I read a story by a Ukrainian journalist who was complaining that some reporters and correspondents that were in Ukraine, some Ukrainian fixers got killed when they were campaigning and helping Western journalists who were in Ukraine reporting on the Russian invasion. And this Ukrainian journalist was complaining that those Western journalists tend to use the help of local fixers, also for very ambitious reporting. And this Ukrainian journalist was saying, yeah, they expect to get Pulitzers out of their reporting, but they don't realize how much risk we are taking for them. This is, let's say, the other side of the story, when because let's call them the Western reporters got the glory for and the prizes for the reporting they are doing, but sometimes we tend to forget the sacrifices or what is behind it. Do you think that this work is also sufficiently rewarded? Should it get more attention, and how, if so?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very simple answer to this in many cases, which is that Ukrainian journalists and all journalists that help journalists from the West in other places should get bylines. They should get full credit if they want it. I mean, there's certain situations where it's not possible for, or it's that they don't desire it for security reasons or whatever. And I think those are exceptions. But in general, there's no reason that Ukrainian journalists shouldn't be getting equal credit or more. And, you know, and then sort of second to that, I think this is already sort of changing in the industry, but, you know, I mean, international publications should be hiring more people that are from the countries that they cover and have genuine expertise rather than, you know, dispatching people for like sort of one-offs, I think, when possible.
I think you're right that the fixers should get more attention because if you're working in a region like Afghanistan, for instance, or I was based in Israel, if you want to go to the Gaza Strip, it's absolutely necessary to work with someone who, well, also tries to protect you, and he knows people who you can trust, who can talk, because not everybody wants to talk with a foreign journalist and so on. So normally you really rely on these people, and they are staying there, so they have the security problems every day. And as a foreign journalist, you go in, you can go out, so it's really different. And I fully agree, it would be really necessary to, for instance, an award would be also a chance to put a special focus on these brave colleagues.
And in your experience, do they get, did the local fixers get also some bunch of part of the reward?
I mean, I think the issue of fixes is a very important, profound one, including the things that you suggested. That you know, sometimes the glory goes here, and there's a category of people who are not on staff and not on contracts, and they need insurance, and they need. You know, in the tragic cases where they get injured or killed, you know, who's going to look after their families, and what is the responsibility of the news organization who might just have hired them for a week when you went in. So I think that's a very profound issue. I'm not sure, I mean, and I think a generous news organization will credit a fixer and sometimes give them equal credit because actually there are many situations in which you can't really tell. I mean, you're right, so you're working, I've been in Gaza and worked with fixers there, and you're right, it'd be impossible to do that, tell that story without their work, and in some senses they deserve equal credit, so it's important to give them the credit and maybe share the prize.
Thanks. Now, since we're talking about, to some extent, money, the money for journalism prizes comes mostly from private foundation, and this is the case of the European Press Prize, or from private companies. Some prizes are sponsored by large corporations, and this is a question that came from Twitter. So, do sponsors have an influence over, let's say, picking the jury members, or should, for example, a financial journalist take a prize sponsored by a bank or from a foundation which is close to the financial sector? Basically, how important is the sponsor for the integrity of the prize, no matter how distinguished is the jury? Let's say, in your experience and in your wish.
I wouldn't say it makes any difference because I don't know who is the sponsor of this or that, and we are not talking about
Journalists who work for Private Eye and The Guardian and the Daily Mirror. And so it was for investigative journalism, and the sad truth is that over the years, the same people applied every year, the same. And I think that was just because of the dwindling gene pool of investigative journalists and the dwindling number of news organizations that were prepared to do it. So I think you did have to sometimes aim off and just say, look, that person's won 3 years running now. Here's this person on a local newspaper. I think you're exactly right about that, who's doing something of quality, and we know this person is great, but let's now recognize somebody else for something that is different. Or you could create different categories. Important to keep rotating the judges, looking out for the diversity of the judges, and all that. But in the end, there will be some great news organizations that deserve to keep winning.
And I think it makes a difference if it is an award on a national level or an international one. So it makes a difference in terms of applications, of course, and the quality.
I guess getting application at an international level is more complicated because you would have to reach several different audiences, which is of course more complicated.
Yeah.
So we have a few minutes left for questions from the audience. Because of COVID, you will not be able to get a mic, but we need, so you can ask your questions, and I will repeat them in the microphone so that it can be recorded. Please. Come on. Please speak loudly so I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll try. Hi, David Lemmers here. Magda, I think you earlier mentioned the responsibility for the prize, or maybe I misunderstood, to see if it's safe or it will be safe for the recipients after winning the prize. Is that something you know is being taken into account elsewhere? It's not familiar to me, so I was curious.
Yeah, I don't think. Sorry. Please go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it okay? Va bene così o? Okay.
Yeah, I did not mean to imply that I have knowledge of that being taken into account. And when I said that, I was not specifically thinking about journalism prizes. I was thinking about prizes at kind of another, like the Nobel, for instance, which can seriously impact somebody's life, I think. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe prizes at that level think about those issues. But I haven't heard about that with relation to any journalism prize.
And I suppose we assume that if somebody has entered, that they've thought about that before entering, which I think is different from a category where you say, well, actually, I mean, in a way, the CPJ is like that they say we've noticed this brave journalist here, they're doing outstanding work, and we would like to acknowledge that and maybe give them a measure of protection. I think they would always check first that they actually would welcome that.
Any more questions? If there is none, we'll wrap it up here. So I'd like to thank our guests, the organizers of the festival, of course, and the European Press Prize team who are here in the room. You can recognize them because they have a different press strap. It is blue. If you have questions for them on, maybe you wish to apply or so on. Remember to check the social media at 8 p.m. sharp when the shortlisted candidates will be announced. Otherwise, thanks to our panelists again for being with us this evening. Thank you for your attention. Good evening and have a great festival.
Thank you.